The Great Hall on Nexus Prime had never seen anything like this. Thousands of beings filled the crystal dome that stretched up into the purple sky. Some floated in the air like glowing balls of light. Others crawled on the walls with dozens of legs. A few looked like walking rocks, while some appeared to be made of pure metal and circuits. This was the Galactic Council's biggest meeting in 1,000 years. Representatives from 847 different worlds had come to decide one simple question: should humans be allowed to join their club? Ambassador Zethkari stood at the center of the great dome. The insect-like being was 12 feet tall, with 4 arms and eyes that could see in 7 different colors. Zethkari had been a diplomat for over 300 years and had seen many species asked to join the council. Most were turned away. Very few were as young and foolish as the humans. Fellow council members, Zethkari began, their voice echoing through the dome in a dozen different languages. Today we discuss the humans of Earth. They have sent us this application for membership. Zethkari held up a small data crystal. The simple device looked tiny in the vast hall, but everyone knew what it contained. Humanity's hopes and dreams, all stored in one small crystal. Let us review what we know about these ... humans, Zethkari said, making the word sound like a joke. They are only 200,000 years old. In galactic terms, they were born yesterday. A wave of laughter rolled through the hall. The ethereal collective, beings made of pure energy, flickered with amusement. The crystal singers from Tau. SETI made musical notes that sounded like giggling. Even the ancient world mind of Kepler 442b, a computer the size of a planet, rumbled with mechanical laughter. They have been in space for less than 100 years, Zethkari continued. They have visited only 12 star systems. They still fight wars among themselves on their homeworld. They cannot even agree on one government for their own planet. More laughter filled the hall. Some of the younger species looked confused. How could any race be so primitive and still think they belonged in the council? But wait, Zethkari said, raising one of their 4 arms. It gets better. These humans have done something no other species has ever dared to do. They have refused to share their technology with us. The laughter stopped. This was not funny anymore. This was shocking. When we made first contact with them 10 years ago, we offered them the gift of knowledge. We showed them how to build better star drives. We offered to teach them about energy weapons and shield technology. We even offered to help them stop their wars and create world peace. Zethkari paused, letting the silence build. And they said no. A roar of angry voices filled the hall. Species that had never agreed on anything suddenly found themselves united. In their shock, the hegemony's war leaders clicked their claws in anger. The Trade Confederation's merchants buzzed with disbelief. How could anyone refuse such gifts? Not only did they refuse our help, Zethkari went on, but they have created what they call exclusion zones around their colonies. They claim these areas belong to them alone. They have warned our ships to stay away. The hall erupted in chaos. Beings that communicated through color changes flashed angry reds and purples. Species that spoke in musical tones created a harsh symphony of rage. The mechanical races sent streams of angry data to each other. The humans, Zethkari shouted over the noise, believe they can survive alone in the galaxy. They think they do not need our wisdom or our friendship. They think they are special. The crystal singers began to hum a low, dangerous note. The ethereal collective grew brighter with fury. Even the peaceful aquatic minds of Oceania sent ripples of displeasure through their water tanks. Let me read you some of their other crimes, Zethkari said, pulling out a longer list. They have militarized their first contact protocols. When they meet new species, their first question is always, are you a threat? Not, can we be friends? Not, what can we learn from each other? They assume every new race might be an enemy. The Peaceful Alliance of Vega shook their flower-like heads in dismay. The Unity Collective, who had never fought a war in their million-year history, sent waves of sadness through their shared mind. They have also refused to join our economic system, Zethkari continued. The Trade Confederation offered them membership in the Galactic Commerce Network. They could have traded freely with thousands of worlds. Instead, they created their own currency and trade only among themselves. The merchants in the hall made unhappy noises. The Trade Confederation had made every species rich through shared commerce. How could the humans be so stupid? And finally, Sethkari said, saving the best for last, they have classified most of their technology as military secrets. They will not tell us how their ships work. They will not share their weapon designs. They act as if we might steal from them or attack. This brought the biggest laugh yet. The idea that any species might need to hide their secrets from the Council was absurd. The Council protected everyone. The Council brought peace and wisdom to the galaxy. The Council had ended wars and created prosperity for millions of worlds. So, Sethkari concluded, we must decide. Should we welcome these paranoid, primitive, selfish humans into our great alliance? Should we give them a voice in the Council that has kept peace for 10,000 years? The vote was swift and unanimous. Not a single species voted to accept humanity, but that was not enough for some of the Council members. I propose we do more than just reject them, called out General Corax of the Hegemony. The massive warrior looked like a cross between a bear and a rhinoceros, with armor plating instead of skin. These humans are dangerous. They are too aggressive and too secretive. We should classify them as a species of concern. The suggestion sent excited whispers through the hall. A species of concern classification was rare and serious. It meant the Council considered that species a potential threat to galactic peace. I support this idea, sang the lead crystal singer. Their refusal to cooperate shows they may become hostile in the future. Agreed, buzzed the Trade Confederation representative. Species that will not join our economic system often turn to piracy and theft. The vote on the new classification was even faster than the first. 847 species voted yes. 0 voted no, but the Council was not finished with humanity yet. They decided to add a special punishment to teach the humans a lesson about respect. I propose a trade embargo, announced the ethereal collective speaker. No Council species should share any technology with humans. No cultural exchanges. No economic cooperation. Let them learn what isolation really means. And territorial restrictions, added the World Mind. They want exclusion zones? Give them one big exclusion zone. Confine them to their home system and their 12 colonies. No expansion beyond that. How long should this punishment last? Asked a small voice from the back of the hall. Sethkari's eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction. Until they come crawling back to us begging for membership. Until they learn to show proper respect for their betters. The final vote was unanimous. Once again, humanity would be cut off from galactic civilization. No trade, no technology sharing, no diplomatic contact except for official business. They would be left alone in their small corner of the galaxy to think about their mistakes. As the Council session ended, many species began placing bets on how long it would take. The Crystal Singers wagered 50 years before humanity destroyed itself in war. The Trade Confederation bet on economic collapse within 20 years. The Hegemony thought the humans would surrender and beg for membership within 10 years. They are so young and so foolish, Sethkari said to their aide as they left the Great Hall. This will teach them the value of humility. None of them suspected that they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. None of them imagined that their laughter would one day turn to screams. They thought they were punishing a primitive species that needed to learn its place. They were wrong. 50 years passed like a gentle breeze across the galaxy. The great powers continued their eternal dance of politics, trade, and occasional war. The Hegemony conquered 3 more star systems, adding their populations to the great war machine. The Ethereal Collective discovered 2 new dimensions and began exploring them with their energy-based bodies. The Trade Confederation opened 17 new trade routes and grew richer than ever. The galaxy moved forward. As it always did, old conflicts ended and new ones began. Species rose to power while others faded into history. New races were discovered in the Outer Rim, evaluated by the Council, and either welcomed into galactic civilization or dismissed as too primitive to matter. Through it all, humanity was forgotten. Ambassador Zethkari, now bearing the scars and honors of 5 decades of diplomatic service, occasionally received reports about human space. The reports were always the same: quiet, boring, and unimportant. The humans seemed to have accepted their punishment. They stayed within their assigned boundaries, built their small colonies, and kept to themselves. Good, Zethkari would say, whenever someone mentioned the humans. Perhaps they have finally learned their lesson about respect. The few times younger council members suggested checking on humanity's progress, they were quickly dismissed by their elders. Let sleeping primitives lie became the unofficial motto regarding human space. Why waste time and resources on a species that had clearly given up? The galaxy's map showed human territory as a small, quiet corner of unimportant systems. Their space traffic was minimal. Their communications were rare and brief. They seemed to have retreated into isolation, exactly as the Council had hoped they would. Some of the more curious species occasionally sent long-range sensors toward human space, but the results were always disappointing. A few mining operations on asteroids, some orbital habitats around their colonies. Nothing impressive, nothing that suggested growth or advancement. They are stagnating, the scientists reported. Exactly what we expected from a species cut off from galactic civilization. The crystal singers, whose territory bordered human space, sometimes detected odd signals from the human region. Strange pulses of energy that did not match any known technology. Radio transmissions in languages that seemed to change and evolve faster than any normal language should. But these reports were filed away and forgotten by busy council bureaucrats, who had more important things to worry about. What the council did not know was that humanity had been very busy during those 50 years of silence. Captain Veltarov, the merchant ship Prophet's Dream, was having a typical day in space when everything changed. The 6-armed Nexan had been flying cargo routes for 40 years and thought he had seen everything the galaxy had to offer. Today he was carrying grain from the agricultural worlds of Demeter to the industrial planets of the Forge Coalition. A simple run through empty space that should have been boring and profitable. His ship dropped out of hyperspace in what his charts showed as an empty system, 300 light-years from the nearest human colony. According to the Galactic database, the system contained nothing but a dead star and some worthless rock planets. It was a perfect place to stop and recalibrate his navigation systems, but when Veltar-S sensors came online, they showed something impossible. There was a city in space. Not a space station or an orbital platform, but an actual city. It stretched for hundreds of kilometers in all directions, a massive structure that seemed to grow and shift as he watched. The architecture was unlike anything in the Galactic database. Geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Materials that seemed to bend light around them. Energy signatures that made his ship's computer stutter and crash. This cannot be real, Veltar whispered to himself. But his sensors insisted it was there. He tried to access the Galactic database to identify the structure, but his computer could not match it to any known technology. The energy readings were impossible. The size was incredible. And most disturbing of all, it was clearly inhabited. Thousands of smaller craft moved around the massive city like insects around a hive. But these were not normal ships. They moved in ways that defied physics, making sharp turns at speeds that should have torn them apart. Some seemed to phase in and out of visible space, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. Veltar reached for his communication controls to report this discovery to the Trade Confederation, but before he could send a message, his ship shuddered. Something had grabbed it. Not a tractor beam like the ones used by normal spacecraft, but something else. Something that reached through his shields as if they were not there and held his ship with invisible hands. Unknown vessel, Veltar tried to broadcast. This is Captain Veltar of the merchant ship Prophet's Dream. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions. There was no response. His ship was being pulled toward the massive city, toward docking bays that seemed to reshape themselves to accommodate his vessel. Veltar tried to fire his engines to escape, but they would not respond. His ship's systems were being controlled by something external, something that understood his technology better than he did. As his ship was drawn closer to the city, Veltar could see details that made his blood freeze. The structure was not built in any conventional sense. It looked grown, like something alive. Parts of it pulsed with organic rhythms. Other sections seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, stretching away into spaces that his eyes could not follow, and everywhere he saw symbols and writing in a language he almost recognized. It looked familiar but wrong, like something he should know but did not quite remember. Just before his ship disappeared into the docking bay, Veltar managed to send a single, desperate transmission on the emergency frequency. Found something. Humans, not what we thought. Send help. Then his ship was swallowed by the city, and the transmission cut to static. Similar incidents began occurring across the galaxy's rim. Merchant ships disappeared without trace. Survey vessels sent routine reports and then went silent. Long-range exploration teams failed to return from their missions. At first, the incidents were dismissed as normal space hazards. Ships were lost all the time to pirates, mechanical failures, or natural phenomena. But as the reports multiplied, patterns began to emerge. All the missing ships had been in sectors near the edges of known space. All had been traveling through regions marked as empty on galactic charts. And the few survivors who managed to escape told stories that made no sense. They spoke of cities that existed in folded space, visible from one angle, but not from another. Ships that moved through dimensions that should not exist. And strangest of all, they spoke of humans who no longer looked entirely human. Their proportions were wrong, reported Commander Threx of the survey ship Deep Seeker, one of the few who had escaped. Too tall, too graceful, too perfect. And their eyes were too bright, too knowing. When they looked at me, I felt like they could see through my soul. They did not speak, added Navigator Quen from the same ship, but I heard their voices in my mind. They asked me questions about the Council, about the trade routes, about our military capabilities. I tried not to answer, but the thoughts came anyway. The reports were filed and forgotten by most officials, dismissed as the ravings of traumatized survivors. But a few analysts began to notice disturbing patterns. Long-range sensors were detecting massive construction projects in supposedly empty systems. Energy signatures that matched no known technology appeared and disappeared across the galactic rim. Most disturbing of all, the cosmic background radiation in certain sectors was changing, becoming quieter and more organized. "It is as if someone is editing the universe," wrote senior analyst Creolon in a report that was classified and buried. "Removing noise, adding structure, turning chaos into order on a scale we have never seen." But the most disturbing reports came from the crystal singers, whose crystalline bodies were sensitive to vibrations across multiple dimensions. They began to detect something they called the quiet. "The universe sings," explained Prime Singer Valanith to anyone who would listen. "Every star, every planet, every living thing adds its voice to the great song. But in the sectors near human space, the song is changing. It is becoming ... organized, directed, as if someone is conducting an orchestra we cannot see." These reports reached Ambassador Zethkari's desk on a quiet Tuesday morning. The old diplomat read them with growing unease, but dismissed them as the fears of primitive species unused to the vastness of space. That dismissal lasted until Zethkari received a message on their personal communicator, a message that should have been impossible. The communication channel was one that only existed in council records. It bypassed all security protocols, all encryption, all safeguards that protected high-ranking officials from unwanted contact. The message appeared directly on Zethkari's screen without going through any of the normal networks. The message was simple, written in perfect council standard. "We remember the laughter. Do you remember what you took from us?" The signature was unmistakably human. Zia Kakari stared at the message for a long time, their forearms trembling slightly. This was impossible. Humans did not have the technology to breach Council security systems. Humans were primitive and isolated. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was unlike anything in the organization's 10,000-year history. Representatives from every major species had gathered on Nexus Prime, their faces showing emotions ranging from confusion to terror. The great crystal dome that usually echoed with civilized debate now buzzed with frightened whispers and urgent conversations. Ambassador Zethkari stood at the center of the hall, but they no longer carried themselves with the confident arrogance of 50 years ago. Their forearms shook slightly as they held the data tablets containing the reports that had brought them all here. Fellow council members, Zethkari began, their voice carrying across the silent hall. We are here to discuss what can only be called a crisis. The humans, whom we classified as a contained species 50 years ago, appear to have developed beyond our expectations. The understatement brought no laughter this time. Everyone in the hall had read the reports. Everyone knew that developed beyond our expectations was like calling a supernova slightly bright. Let me read you the confirmed incidents from the past 6 months, Zethkari continued, consulting their first tablet. 17 merchant vessels have disappeared in sectors bordering human space. All were traveling through regions marked as empty on our charts. Of the 43 crew members who managed to escape in life pods, 37 have required treatment for severe psychological trauma. The Crystal Singers made a low, mournful note. The Ethereal Collective dimmed their glow in distress. Even the ancient world mind of Kepler 442b processed the information with visible difficulty, its mechanical voice stuttering as it tried to make sense of the data. The survivors all report similar experiences, Zethkari went on. Structures in space that should not exist, technology that violates known physical laws, and humans who appear to have undergone significant modifications. A delegate from the Peaceful Alliance raised one of their flower-like appendages. What kind of modifications? Zethkari consulted another tablet. According to survivor testimony, the humans they encountered were taller than baseline human specifications. Their movements were too fluid, too precise. Their eyes glowed with an internal light. Most disturbing, they appeared to communicate through direct mental contact rather than verbal speech. Worried murmurs filled the hall. Mental communication was the privilege of only the most advanced species, races that had evolved beyond the need for primitive vocal cords and sound waves. For humans to develop such abilities in only 50 years was impossible. Furthermore, Zethkari continued, long-range sensors have detected massive construction projects in over 3,000 star systems. These are all systems that our charts mark as uninhabited. The energy signatures from these projects do not match any known technology in our databases. General Korax of the Hegemony rose from his seat, his massive form casting a shadow across the hall. Are you telling us that the humans have expanded into 3,000 systems without us noticing? That appears to be the case, Zethkari replied reluctantly. Our monitoring systems show no evidence of human ships traveling to these locations. No hyperspace signatures, no engine emissions, no communication traffic. Yet the construction projects are there, and they are clearly artificial. How is that possible? Demanded the Trade Confederation representative. No species can build in 3,000 systems simultaneously without massive supply lines and transportation networks. We do not know, Zethkari admitted. The technology being used is beyond our current understanding. The hall erupted in concerned chatter. Species that had felt secure in their technological superiority suddenly found themselves facing an unknown that defied all their assumptions about what was possible. There is more, Zethkari said, and the hall fell silent again. The Crystal Singers have reported anomalies in the cosmic background radiation. Sectors of space near human construction projects are becoming organized. The random noise of the universe is being replaced by structured patterns. Prime Singer Velaneth rose gracefully, their crystalline body catching and reflecting the dome's light. The universe has always sung in chaos, they said, their voice like wind chimes in A gentle breeze. Every star, every world, every living thing adds its voice to the great symphony. But in the regions touched by human presence, the chaos is being replaced by harmony. Not natural harmony, but imposed harmony. It is as if someone is rewriting the fundamental laws of physics. The implications of this statement sent waves of fear through the assembled delegates. If humans had developed the ability to manipulate the basic forces of the universe, they had moved far beyond any known level of technological advancement. What do they want? Asked a small voice from the delegation of the aquatic minds. Have they made any demands? Stated any intentions? Zethkari's expression grew even more troubled. That is perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this situation. They have made no demands, sent no ultimatums, made no threats. They simply exist and wait. Wait for what? Demanded General Korax. We do not know. The silence that followed was broken by a new voice, one that had remained quiet throughout the session. The ethereal collective's representatives suddenly blazed brighter, their energy form pulsing with urgent communication. We have been monitoring quantum fluctuations across the galaxy, the being said, their voice like static electricity. For the past 10 years, we have detected signs that someone has been manipulating probability itself. Events that should be random are becoming predictable. Chance encounters are becoming planned meetings. The very fabric of cause and effect is being guided. The mathematical impossibility of this statement struck the assembled delegates like a physical blow. Manipulating probability was the stuff of theoretical physics papers, not practical technology. Even the most advanced species could barely detect quantum fluctuations, let alone control them. Are you suggesting, asked the world mind in its mechanical voice, that humans have learned to control luck itself? We are suggesting, the ethereal replied, that luck may no longer exist in sectors where humans operate. Everything that happens there happens because they want it to happen. Before anyone could respond to this terrifying possibility, the lights in the great dome began to dim. The crystal walls, which had stood unchanged for millennia, started to resonate with a low, harmonic frequency that made every being in the hall feel uneasy. What is happening? Someone called out, but the question was answered before anyone could reply. The space at the center of the hall began to fold in on itself, reality bending like heated metal. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with energy that made the delegates' fur stand on end and their mechanical components spark when the distortion cleared. A single figure stood in the center of the amphitheater. It was human, but not as any of them remembered humans to be. The being was tall and graceful, with proportions that were somehow more perfect than nature usually allowed. Its skin seemed to glow with an internal light, and its eyes held depths that suggested vast intelligence and even vaster patience. When it spoke, its words bypassed the delegates' ears entirely, appearing directly in their minds in whatever language they thought in. "Hello," it said, and the simple greeting carried layers of meaning that made every listener understand that they were in the presence of something far beyond their comprehension. We thought it was time we had a conversation. The hall was completely silent. 847 species, many of whom had never agreed on anything, were united in their terror of the impossible being that stood before them. "You seem surprised to see us?" the human continued, its mental voice carrying what might have been amusement. "We suppose that is understandable. You did, after all, decide that we were not worth your attention 50 years ago. Ambassador Zethkari, drawing on centuries of diplomatic training, managed to find their voice. We welcome this opportunity for dialogue. Perhaps we can discuss what?" The human interrupted, and now its mental voice carried something that might have been curiosity. "Your terms for our membership in your council? Your generous offer to share your technology with us? Your willingness to treat us as equals?" The sarcasm in the being's thoughts was so sharp it made several delegates wince physically. "We remember the laughter," the human said, its gaze sweeping across the assembled representatives. "We remember the votes. We remember being told that we were too young, too primitive, too dangerous to be trusted with galactic civilization. That was was 50 years ago? Zethkari stammered. Perhaps we could reconsider. 50 years, the human agreed. 50 years of isolation. 50 years of being cut off from your trade networks, your cultural exchanges, your technological sharing. Do you know what we did with those 50 years? The question hung in the air like a challenge. No one dared to answer. We learned, the human said simply. We learned that the universe is far stranger and more wonderful than any of your species ever imagined. We learned that the limitations you accept as absolute are merely suggestions. We learned that consciousness itself can be expanded, enhanced, and transcended. The being gestured, and suddenly every delegate could see images in their minds. Cities that existed in folded space. Ships that traveled. Admiral Kreshtar of the Hegemony's first fleet had conquered 12 worlds and exterminated 4 entire species during his long military career. The massive warrior had seen battle across half the galaxy and feared nothing that lived among the stars. When the High Command ordered him to investigate the human situation, he expected to face desperate primitives in crude spacecraft. He did not expect to find that Earth's solar system had been transformed into something from a fever dream. The First Fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, 12 massive dreadnoughts and their escort vessels arranged in perfect battle formation. Each ship was a kilometer long and armed with weapons that could crack planets. Together, they represented the most powerful military force the Hegemony had ever assembled. Admiral Kreshtar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Iron Dominion, and stared at the sensor readings with growing disbelief. His tactical officer, a competent Hegemony sub-commander named Velkara, was reading the data with a voice that grew more uncertain with each word. Admiral, sensors show ... This cannot be correct. Report, Kreshtar growled, his 4-meter frame towering over the bridge crew. Sir, the entire system has been ... modified. The sun appears to be partially enclosed in some kind of artificial structure. I count at least 40 artificial worlds in stable orbits. The asteroid belt has been converted into what appears to be a continuous industrial complex stretching across the entire orbital plane. Kreshtar moved to the main display screen, his massive hands gripping the console until the metal creaked. What he saw there challenged everything he thought he knew about engineering and physics. The sun was indeed partially enclosed, wrapped in a complex web of structures that seemed to capture and redirect its energy. But these were not the simple solar collectors described in theoretical physics papers. These structures moved and shifted like living things, growing and adapting in real time to optimize their efficiency. Where the planets Mars and Jupiter had once orbited, artificial worlds now hung in space. Not space stations or orbital habitats, but actual planets, complete with atmospheres and what appeared to be continents and oceans. Somehow, humanity had learned to build worlds from scratch. How long would it take to construct something like this? Kreshtar asked his science officer. Using our technology, several thousand years, Admiral. And that assumes we could solve the engineering problems involved, which we cannot. The asteroid belt had been even more dramatically transformed. What had once been scattered rocks drifting in lonely orbits was now a single, continuous structure that ringed the entire system. It pulsed with energy patterns that hurt to look at directly, and his ship's computers could not even begin to calculate its total mass. Admiral, his communication officer reported, we are receiving no signals from the system. No traffic control, no identification requests, no challenges to our presence. It is completely silent. That silence was more unnerving than any threat could have been. Every civilized system in the galaxy bustled with communication traffic. Ships called out their positions, planets broadcast their status, space stations chattered with routine messages. But the Sol system was wrapped in a silence so complete it seemed to absorb sound itself. Take us closer, Kreshtar ordered. Battle stations. The First Fleet moved deeper into the system, their weapons powered and their shields raised. But nothing challenged them. No defense platforms emerged from hiding. No human ships rose to meet them. The artificial worlds continued their slow rotation, and the great ring around the sun continued its patient pulsing, but nothing acknowledged their presence. It was only when they reached the orbit of the third planet that Kreshtar realized they were not being ignored. They were being studied. "Admiral," his sensor operator called out in a voice tight with fear, "I am detecting massive energy buildups throughout the system, but I cannot locate their source. It is as if the energy is coming from space itself." Before Kreshtar could respond, the stars around his fleet began to change. What had appeared to be empty space suddenly revealed itself to be anything but empty. Structures materialized out of nothing, as if they had been invisible moments before. Ships that defied every known law of physics emerged from dimensions that should not exist. They were not built in any sense that the hegemony understood construction. They seemed grown, evolved, shaped by minds that had transcended the limitations of traditional engineering. Some were smooth and organic, like living creatures made of metal and light. Others were geometric impossibilities, shapes that existed in more dimensions than the eye could follow. "How many ships?" Kreshtar demanded. I cannot count them, Admiral. They appear to be phasing in and out of normal space. My sensors detect thousands, but the number keeps changing." The human fleet surrounded the hegemony vessels without making any aggressive moves. They simply appeared and waited, their presence more intimidating than any weapon could have been. That was when the voice came. It did not come through the communication systems. It did not come through the air. It came directly into the minds of every crew member on every ship simultaneously, speaking in whatever language they thought in. "Welcome to our system," the voice said, and despite its calm tone, every warrior in the fleet felt their blood freeze. "We wondered when you would come to visit." Admiral Kreshtar tried to respond through normal communication channels, but his voice came out as a strangled whisper. The presence that spoke to them was vast, beyond comprehension, not a single mind, but something collective and distributed across impossible distances. "You came to judge us again," the voice continued, and now it carried undertones of amusement that were somehow more terrifying than anger would have been. "How delightfully consistent of you." A figure appeared on the main display screen of every ship in the fleet. It was recognizably human in basic shape, but wrong in every detail. Too tall, too graceful, too perfect. Its eyes held depths that suggested vast intelligence and patience that spanned geological ages. When it spoke, its lips did not move. The words formed directly in their minds. "I am what your species would call a representative," it said, "though that term is inadequate. I'm a focal point for a consciousness that spans this entire system. Every human in soul shares in this conversation through me. What do you want?" Kreshtar managed to growl, his warrior's pride fighting against the fear that threatened overwhelm him. "Want?" The being replied, and its mental voice carried what might have been surprise. "We wanted to be left alone 50 years ago. We wanted to develop in peace. But your council decided that isolation was not enough. You decided to send us a message about our place in the galaxy. Around the hegemony fleet, space began to fold and twist. Reality bent as human ships moved through dimensions that normal physics said could not exist. They were not threatening, not yet. But their mere presence was a demonstration of power that made the hegemony's weapons seem like toys. So we learned," the human continued. "We learned that the universe is far stranger than your council ever imagined. We learned that consciousness can be expanded beyond the limits of individual minds. We learned that matter and energy are merely suggestions that can be politely ignored." Images flooded the minds of every crew member. They saw human cities that existed in folded space-time, where distance was negotiable and gravity was a matter of choice. They saw humans who had merged with their technology, becoming hybrid beings of flesh and quantum circuits. They saw vast networks of minds working together as a single intelligence that spanned star systems. "We solved death," the human said simply. "We solved distance. We solved the fundamental forces that your scientists think are absolute laws. We became what? You always claimed we could never be. Impossible, Admiral Kreshtar snarled, his military training rejecting what his senses told him. No species can advance that far in 50 years. No species ever had to, the human replied. No species was ever cut off so completely from galactic civilization. No species was ever forced to develop entirely on their own, with no external help or guidance. You created the perfect conditions for rapid evolution, Admiral. You gave us no choice but to transcend our limitations or die. The implications of this statement hit the Admiral like a physical blow. The Council's punishment had not weakened humanity. It had freed them from the gradual, conservative development that marked all galactic species. Forced to innovate or perish, they had chosen a third option, to evolve beyond the need for either. What happens now? Kreshtar asked, and for the first time in his long military career, his voice carried a note of fear. The human smiled, an expression that somehow managed to be both beautiful and terrifying. Now, Admiral, you get to deliver a message to your Council. You get to tell them that their children have grown up. And if they don't listen? The human smile grew wider, and suddenly every crew member in the fleet could feel the vast intelligence behind it, a collective consciousness that spanned not just the solar system but reached out into the galaxy beyond. Then they will learn. The same lesson they taught us 50 years ago, the being said. That strength matters more than wisdom. That power matters more than politics. That those who cannot adapt to change will be left behind by those who can. The Great Crystal Dome on Nexus Prime had never hosted a gathering like this. Every species in the galaxy had sent representatives, even races that had not communicated with the Council for centuries. Ancient beings who normally existed in deep hibernation had awakened to attend. Machine intelligences that processed information for eons, without speaking, had suddenly found their voices. The emergency session was the largest in galactic history, but it was also the quietest. Fear had a way of making even the most talkative. Species choose their words carefully. Ambassador Zethkari stood at the center of the hall, but they no longer commanded attention through authority. Instead, they held the focus of 847 species through the weight of the terrible knowledge they carried. The reports from Admiral Kreshtar's fleet had changed everything. Fellow council members, Zethkari began, their voice echoing in the unnaturally silent hall, we face a situation that has no precedent in galactic history. The species we dismissed 50 years ago as too primitive for membership has become something beyond our understanding. The words carried across the dome like stones dropping into still water. Every delegate had read the reports. Every species had run their own analysis of the data. The conclusions were always the same and always impossible to accept. Admiral Kreshtar's fleet encountered technology that violates every known law of physics, Zethkari continued. Humans have learned to manipulate space-time itself. They have transcended the limitations of biological existence. They have become something that our language does not have words to describe. Prime Singer Valaneth rose gracefully from their crystalline seat. The cosmic song has changed, they said, their harmonic voice carrying notes of deep unease. In sectors where humans have established their presence, the universe itself sounds different. Chaos has been replaced by harmony, but it is not natural harmony. It is imposed harmony, as if reality itself is being conducted. The implications of this statement sent ripples of fear through the assembled delegates. If humans could manipulate the fundamental structure of reality, they had moved far beyond technological advancement into something approaching godhood. What do they want? Asked the representative from the Peaceful Alliance, their flower-like head drooping with worry. That is the most disturbing aspect of this situation, Zethkari replied. According to Admiral Kreshtar's report, they claim to want nothing from us. They have made no demands, issued no ultimatums, stated no terms. They simply exist and— Wait for what? Demanded General Korax, his massive frame radiating the frustrated aggression of a warrior who had found an enemy he could not fight. We believe they are waiting for us to decide our own fate, Zethkari answered. The human representative made it clear that they remember our rejection 50 years ago. They remember the laughter. They remember being told they were too primitive, too dangerous, too young to be part of galactic civilization. The silence that followed was broken by the ethereal collective speaker, their energy form pulsing with urgent communication. We have detected similar human structures appearing in over 5,000 star systems in the past month. Not expansion in any traditional sense, but spontaneous manifestation. They are not traveling to these locations. They are simply creating themselves there. How is that possible? Asked the world mind, its mechanical voice processing the impossibility with visible difficulty. We do not know, the ethereal replied. The humans appear to have developed technology that treats distance as a suggestion rather than a physical law. Space and time are concepts they can manipulate at will. The Trade Confederation representative, a being whose species had built their entire civilization around the predictable movement of goods and services across space, spoke with a voice that trembled with fear. If they can appear anywhere instantaneously, our entire understanding of economics, defense, and territorial sovereignty becomes meaningless. Exactly, Zethkari said grimly. We are dealing with a species that has transcended the limitations that define our reality. They operate by rules we do not understand, using capabilities we cannot comprehend. The debate that followed was unlike any in Council history. Species that had been enemies for millennia found themselves united in their fear. Ancient races that had considered themselves the masters of the galaxy suddenly felt like children playing with toys they did not understand. Some delegates called for immediate military action. Marshal every fleet, General Corax roared. Every weapon, every ship, every warrior, strike now before they grow stronger. Others advocated complete surrender. We have no choice but to submit, whispered the representative from the merchant guilds. We are insects trying to fight gods. Still others suggested diplomacy. Offer them everything we denied them 50 years ago, pleaded the Peaceful Alliance. Full membership, technology sharing, recognition of their territorial claims. Perhaps we can undo the damage we have done. The arguments raged for hours, voices rising and falling like waves in a storm. But gradually a terrible realization began to settle over the assembled delegates. None of their options mattered. They were no longer the ones making decisions about the galaxy's future. The realization became concrete when the lights began to dim. The crystal walls of the Great Dome, which had stood unchanged for 10,000 years, began to resonate with a frequency that made every being in the hall feel uneasy. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with energy that made their fur stand on end and their circuits spark with static. Space at the center of the hall began to fold in on itself. Reality, bending like heated metal. The distortion was more controlled than the one that had appeared during their last session, more deliberate, as if someone had been practicing when the folding stopped. A figure stood in the center of the amphitheater. It was human, but even more transformed than the being they had encountered before. This one barely maintained a recognizable shape, existing as much in dimensions they could not see as in the three they understood. When it moved, parts of it seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously. When it spoke, its words appeared directly in the minds of every delegate, carrying layers of meaning that normal language could never convey. We have made our decision, it said, and every listener understood that we did not refer to a government or a council, but to something vast and distributed beyond imagining. The hall was completely silent. 847 species, many of whom had never agreed on anything, were united in their terror of the impossible being that stood before them. You taught us that strength matters more than wisdom, the human continued, its mental voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. That age matters more than potential. That conformity matters more than growth. We have learned your lessons well. Ambassador Zethkari, drawing on every bit of diplomatic training from their 3 centuries of service, managed to find their voice. Perhaps we can discuss terms for coexistence. Find a way for our civilizations to share the galaxy. The human turned its attention to Zethkari, and the old diplomat felt their mind being gently examined, their thoughts read like an open book. Coexistence, the human repeated, and its mental voice carried what might have been amusement. You mean you want us to pretend that we are equals when we both know that is no longer true? We could offer you full membership in the council, Zethkari pressed desperately. All the privileges we denied 50 years ago. Recognition, trade, rights, territorial sovereignty. Membership in your council, the human said, and now its voice carried clear amusement. You offer us a seat at a table we could flip over with a thought. You offer us rights we could take without asking. You offer us recognition from beings we no longer need to impress. The terrible truth of the statement settled over the hall like a shroud. The council no longer had anything to offer humanity except their submission. What do you want from us? General Corax demanded, his warrior's pride forcing him to speak. Even as his warrior's instincts screamed at him to flee, the human turned its impossible attention to the hegemony commander. We want you to understand, it said simply. We want you to comprehend what you created when you decided we were not worthy of your civilization. Images flooded the minds of every delegate. They saw human cities that existed in folded space-time, where the laws of physics were negotiable contracts rather than absolute rules. They saw humans who had merged with their technology, becoming hybrid beings of flesh and quantum consciousness. They saw vast networks of minds working together as a single intelligence that spanned dimensions. We solved death, the human said, its voice carrying the casual certainty of someone discussing the weather. We solved distance. We solved the fundamental forces that your scientists consider absolute laws. We became what you always claimed. We could never be. Impossible, General Corax snarled, though his voice lacked conviction. Nothing is impossible, the human replied. There are only things that have not yet been achieved. You created the perfect conditions for our evolution when you cut us off from your gradual, conservative development. You forced us to innovate. Or die, so we chose a third option. What option? Whispered someone from the back of the hall.